This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. Rugby has been around for near enough 200 years. It's been a cultural fascination for a century, a professional game for nearly 30. For generations, rugby union has been dissected, reviewed, analysed, fought on, probed, scanned, studied, scrutinised, torn apart by entire teams, employed now by hundreds of clubs worldwide to find the best and tiniest tactical advantages possible. And yet, over hundreds of years of sporting evolution, nobody has yet ever found a tactic better than give it to the Fijian lad. Fiji and rugby were meant to be. It's a soulmate situation where the pair were sickeningly perfect for each other. The sport itself built for Fijians to excel at, and Fiji seemingly pumping the game with more unbelievable athletes per capita than any other nation on earth. It takes just one glance at the Flying Fijian Sevens team to see the sheer talent available. The only side who can lose Jerry Tuai and barely notice. Fiji rugby is a brand associated with the things that people truly love about the sport. Skill, passion, talent, a want and need to play, and its team is one beloved the entire world over. And yet, thanks to the role that money, colonialism and scrummaging can play, the Flying Fijians have never entered the Rugby World Cup as anything other than rank outsiders, a ticket spinner for glorious tries that you know they'll score, probably in defeat. The side everybody who isn't from Wales wants to see their team draw for the pure entertainment factor. That, however, might be slightly different this time. Not the thing about Wales not wanting to draw them, that's very much true. A fantastic Fijian team are currently gearing up to face one of their most favourable draws ever, with the bookies odds the shortest they've ever been, and fans' mouths are flutter at the prospect of what could happen, because this could just be Fiji's year. So, with the world cheering them on and gods giving them a little bit of favour this time, could Fiji make the quarterfinals of the 2023 Rugby World Cup and, whisper it, possibly even go further than that? The Flying Fijians have made the last 8 twice, only to be knocked out by an eventual finalist on both occasions. Their first escape from the pools came in the first ever Rugby World Cup, where a side inspired by the unbelievable, phenomenal, honestly one of my favourite players of all time, fullback Severo Superboot Coroduadua, defeated Hugo Porter's much fancied Argentina, a team who'd really pushed the All Blacks a couple of years earlier, and whilst he then missed a last minute penalty that would secure a draw against Italy, Fiji's late comeback in that game was enough to get them out of the group on points difference. They then took on France, where even Maestro Coroduadua, a flawless flair player blessed with a boot the size of Saturn, started to feel the pressure. Fiji headed home without a medal, but with everybody who watched them feeling like they were winners. That only went double on their second visit to the last 8. Handed a remarkably similar group to this year, in the same host country, a side powered by Akapusi Ungera held off a spirited Japan in a phenomenal thriller, defeated a really strong Canadian team, which is a sentence I really miss being able to say, and sent out a second choice pack to play against Australia, knowing the real test was in just 5 days' time. For that was when Fiji took on Wales in what is now one of the Rugby World Cup's most famous games of all time. Despite the all or nothing once in a lifetime stakes, Fiji approached the game with a freshness, a looseness and a sense of wonder. And Wales fell in love, just as the rest of us did. Cymru trying to beat Fiji with their own flame, the game's greatest tactic once again coming back into play. Fiji gave it to the Fijian lad over and over again, and Wales only had one Shane Williams to try and compete with that full 15 of freakish, inspiring, unbelievable talent. Fiji did Fiji, and then full time went. The Flying Fijians were headed to the quarterfinals. And that pretty much brings us bang up to date as who should Fiji be facing in their first game out in France, looking to make quarterfinal number 3, but that cherished old foe, Wales. An opponent they've actually faced in every World Cup since. And just as it was in 2007, that Welsh rendezvous might be the one that unlocks the potential of reaching the quarterfinals. And Wales will be wary. They came so close to repeating the trick in 2019 too. As a Welsh type myself, I vividly, really clearly remember the feeling of having my head in my hand, sat behind the poster full of I was kicking the conversion for here. The dread setting in as it just continued to happen. Fiji continued to happen. I was the only person probably feeling as much dread as Josh Adams was this entire game. Vola Vola et al. Giving it to the ludicrous wingers Joshua Tuasova and Semiron Drandra over and over again. However, the years since the Cymru comeback that spared Welsh blushes have both been incredibly eventful and rather quiet for Fijian rugby. With previous coach John McGee let go at the end of his contract, Fiji decided to go big. Desperate for a huge name to sign on the dotted line to replace him, Fiji headed to Squarespace. Able to build a custom recruitment site to catch Eddie Jones or Razio Rasmus's eye, the social media sharing functions made it so easy to get out there, and the form features and newsletter integration allowed them to keep tabs on every single application, letting them stay in touch with photos and videos so easily integrated, showing every perk of what working on the islands could be like. And sure enough, it wasn't long before one particular big name found their way to this website, and it caught their attention, because why wouldn't it? It's such a beautiful website built so easily. And if you want to build your own website so easily, can't ever say how easy it is, please head to the link in the description and use the offer code SQUIDGRUGBY to save yourself some money. Because in early 2020, the Fijian Rugby Union appointed former Scotland and Claremont boss Vern Cotter as their new head coach. Having previously led Claremont Auvergne to 3 Champions Cup finals and their first ever French title, not to mention mentoring some young coach called Joe Schmidt, who you might have heard of, before taking Scotland to a best ever Six Nations and very almost a World Cup semi-final, if not for the thing that we choose not to talk about. Cotter felt like an absolutely perfect fit for the Islanders. A connoisseur of attacking rugby, Claremont-era Cotter had an obsession with building the perfect game, total rugby as he called it, a theoretical model where everything was a strength and all players could execute all roles at any moment. And so, no surprise, when asked why he chose the job, he said the reason was simple. He wanted to work with Fijian players, with forwards as freakish as Pamfiliato and Levani Bottia, and backs as big as Tuasova and Levani Bottia. Maybe that perfect game might just be possible. And yet, over the next 3 years, Fiji found themselves more concerned with arranging a game than perfecting one. Despite being invited to the Amazon Prime Cup that we all mentally deleted from our brains, COVID outbreaks meant Fiji played just one game in 2020, a comprehensive demolition in the end of Georgia, where hopes Cotter could improve Fiji as much as he did Scotland felt very much alive despite difficult circumstances. Yet things didn't get much better even once the world began to recover. Between January 1st, 2020 and June 31st, 2023, Fiji played just 11 games in 3 years. 3 won, 1 draw, 7 losses. But it's hard to point blame when there's been no consistency or ability to build in their fixture list. If you drill down a little, their squads would vary wildly, or dependent on release of their best players, who were mostly based in France and England, and even COVID, flight, restriction type situations. And whilst this gave Cotter a chance to build some depth, it meant he didn't really have a full-strength Fiji team once over 3 years in charge. The closest probably coming, funnily enough, against Wales in 2021, when a red card for Ronnie Sal began a bit of a tumble right as the game was starting to twist towards Fiji's way. And it's a shame, because whilst many eggs were being broken, we were just starting to see a few tasty omelettes form in the Fijian team, as Cotter added a structure to their attack that allowed their best players to play loose. Here, Fiji play a 2-3-2-1 structure with 2 forwards on the edge, a group of 3, and another group of 2 outside them. Now, this structure is more commonly stylized as 1-3-2-2, but Fiji evidently had no intention of tangy to carry here. I would much rather call for the ball in the boot, go wide and use the backs to win a ruck if necessary. It might sound like a simple twist, but by pinning the 2 pods either side of them, rather than just in an expansive channel of their own, it allowed Fiji to develop more continuity. Kunavula, being a freak, ignores the man outside him, rides 2 tackles, offloads and sets up for the try as a result. However, all the steady building Cotter was piling in seemed to come to nothing last December as the Fijian Rugby Union joined the cavalcade of other nations releasing their coach from their contract less than a year before the Rugby World Cup, and it's gone so well for every single one of them. Like Andy Robinson with Romania before him, it seems quite unclear just why Cotter left. The coach saying he wished he could stay, despite the press release saying it was his choice to go. Yet, just a few weeks later, Fiji would go on to unveil Cotter's replacement in the form of none other than former FRU performance manager and former, even further back, fan favourite player, Simon Raiwalui. Approached by the union himself, Raiwalui was given the job after their first choice, the hugely ambitious potshot of Scott Robertson, who since accepted the All Blacks job, turned the offer down. Since retiring as a player in 2011, Raiwalui has taken up near enough every job in the game bar fullback. He became team manager at Racing 92 in 2012 before being appointed their forwards coach just 3 months later. He was an assistant with the Wallabies for the final years under Michael Checker before bouncing back upstairs to take a job in his beloved Fiji as general manager of high performance, his job being to oversee any team named Fiji. The under-20s, the men, the women, the 15, the 7s, etc. He clearly impressed, as after 3 years in the role of managing those teams, the union demoted him to their biggest job that they have. It's a confusing situation. Now, Raiwalui has never been a senior head coach before, but his bounced about career provides perhaps a unique preparation for this challenge. He's experienced as a rugby coach at professional level. He understands the game incredibly well. He knows how to manage an environment, and perhaps most importantly, he's personally held the job of almost everyone he's going to deal with in his time as head coach. Players, managers, reps, assistant coaches. It's an empathy that goes far and may help build this Fiji team into something really special. And indeed, it got off to a pretty great start in the first game against Tonga. Fiji, under Raiwalui, have adopted perhaps the most classic 1-3-2-2 structure we've seen in international rugby since Japan pioneered it at the last World Cup. It's as platonic and ideal as you'll see, rather than the kind of twisty, tweaky variation that Cotter was working on. 3 forwards are set to crash off the ruck, 2 more pods wider, and most is played off 10, with debutant Caleb Muntz having a pretty excellent game in the pivot position. However, the most interesting part of this is what it allows to happen wider, with the likes of Randrandra and Tuisova, proper power runners, frequently slotting out the back of these pods forwards, in the space we call the boot, this kind of space out the back. This would allow Fiji a whole nother level of directness and chaos that could add huge amounts to their game. Defenses as good as they are nowadays, why not put your most dangerous runner 2 passes away instead of 5, where everyone could just drift and catch up? Increasingly, structure is being used as a means to introduce looseness to the game, with France leading the way in that, and whilst they're clearly a work in progress at this stage, Fiji have all the tools at their disposal to take this up an extra few levels, especially with their phenomenal first choice talent filtering back into the team. Whilst a few names in the backline, most notably the aforementioned Semi Randrandra, who's really good at rugby, and Joshua Tuisova, who's also really good at rugby, speak for themselves, is once you delve into their pack that I think we really start cooking. Fijian loose forward feels like its own category of position that doesn't apply to the rest of rugby. No one else can ever replicate it. And despite Penfiliato, one of the most bullshit level skillful players on the planet, just one of the best flankers there is, to the point at which you kind of forget about him because like, he can't be real. He's that good. Sadly, withdrawing from the World Cup to focus on his club career, there's still proper danger in that Islander back row, because there's not many players more likely to cause Pool C chaos than the converted centre who prompts plenty of conversions himself, Levani Bottia. The only unsurprising entry on Bottia's range of positions is prison warden. He seems to have every skill in rugby. In the past, we've seen backs fill in on the flank. We're talking Kinimomo Valley, fellow Fijian, Bundy Arki, Alberto Scarby, even JPR Williams to go right back. It's usually because they're smart players who are direct with the ball and hit hard without it. And whilst this is true of Bottia, the really mad, impressive part of his game that isn't necessarily true of all those others is how he's propelled himself from being a good defensive centre who knows how to hit to one of the best jackling technical sevens in the game. Now, playing for La Rochelle means you're on the same team as Will Skelton, Union Tonio, Pierre Bourgeois, this lad called Gregory Aldreet, Jonathan Dante, and basically any player who's ever won a turnover, but Bottia has become such a weapon for them. Head coach Ronan Nagara brought in fellow Irishman from the noughties, Donnachrow Callahan, as forwards coach just under 2 years ago, and he's put a real emphasis on efficiency, which had a huge impact on their Fijian 7 and how he plays the game. A player of his size and strength is always going to win jackals like this, but Bottia's choice of breakdown to attack is what makes him really stand out from the crowd. We'll often see Bottia just stand off the play for a couple of phases at a time, so that his every involvement can be impactful and he's not wasting any energy on a 1%er or a soak-up tackle, when a player with his raw gifts can make a game-changing impact in a moment if they're just patient and smart enough to wait for the opportunity to arise, which is something he's really learned to do over the last few years. Here on second phase off kick return, Saracens' Jackson Ray steams onto the ball to make a huge carry, and seeing Wardy line him up, Bottia considers a tackle assist, but resists it, steps away. He stands off until Ray is on the ground, the Saracens pack having had to run back and forth in the kick chase, meaning Jamie George is a split second late to arrive, allowing Bottia to get over the ball, win the turnover. It's sublime. This was just a small part of Bottia's unbelievable performance that day. The thieving Fijian putting in a man-of-the-match display to take La Rochelle into the semi-finals of Europe's biggest trophy. Here, Nick Tompkins and his chaotic postman energy carries into a pile of bodies, so La Rochelle smother him. This massive dome of horizontal meatmen means Tompkins and company physically can't get to ground, making an offload necessary if Saracens want to prevent the turnover. Bottia spots this and just stands in the way, just lingers about, just, stands there. He doesn't target the ball or anything, he just lets the referee's whistle do that for him. It's much harder for one of Saracens' teammates to rip the ball off him if there's a 16-stone Fijian stood between them, and eventually the referee gets bored and awards position to Pika 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 RFC. Other standouts include Sam Matavesi, who has become a real fan favourite of Franklin's Gardens, brother of former Fiji utility back Josh, and just as skillful, and somehow, despite being a hooker, lighter than his brother who played fly half for them in the last World Cup. Matavesi has gone from lovely part of the Cotter side to the fulcrum of what Raiwalui is looking to achieve. There's been much more set-piece focus in the PNC this year, and Matavesi has been a key part of that, even nabbing a few tries off the rolling maul that Fiji now have. That sound you heard is Warren Gatland waking in his sleep. Fiji have a really good rolling maul now off the back of this PNC. It's alarming. He might not be a headline grabber, but if Fiji are going to go far in this World Cup, expect so much of it to be built off the grafting performances of Sam Matavesi. If Fiji are going to play well, Matavesi will have to play well. And you know what? He almost certainly does play well for them. And if we can stay in the front row for a moment, because their duo of party time looseheads, Aroni Maui and Penny Ravai, might just be the key to unravelling Wales once and for all. Whilst Ravai went to the 2019 World Cup, he arrived as a kind of novelty party trick player. A loosehead who plays sevens. It's a bit like entering a dog who plays the trumpet into Crufts. The skill is amazing, but the core work, the scrum, the contact area, his coat and ability to walk in a straight line wasn't there. Over the last few years, however, Ravai has improved his scrummaging to no end and added the proper jackal threat element to his game, as well as getting really good at fly ball. Yet, as he was building that out, Raiwalui's former club, Saracens, were unearthing an utter gem of their own in the form of Aroni Maui. A strong enough scrummager to keep Makovan and Pola out the team last season, Maui has built in the opposite direction to Ravai. A scrummager first who's devised an incredible all-round game since, the pair have given Raiwalui like-for-like replacements who can nonetheless be swapped out on the basis of emphasis that he wants to put on for a certain game or certain moment in the match. In last year's PNC, for possibly the first time ever, Fiji had the strongest scrum in a competition, shoving Samoa and Tonga off their own ball, and that's been repeated this year out, with their scrum decimating the Tongan pack, the much fancied, much recruited into Tongan pack. This likely won't remain dominance against silly monster Taniela Tupou or form loose-heading European club rugby, Nicky Smith, but it might just mean that those big dogs, those teams Fiji looking to upset, can't squeeze the life out of the Fijians via their scrum as they have in past World Cups. It might just take away the one area of dominance Wales would have been able to squeeze out of them. When you have a team full of athletes like Fiji, parity could be enough to dominate the game. Because much as we talk about skill sets, it's that parity that unites the great Fiji teams throughout history, 87, 2007, and any of their one-off wins. Strong enough packs to keep them in the game, and the core Raiwalui is building is almost scary. Not because they're going to Springbok style roll over every team in the entire World Cup, but because they can match most other teams and give the rest of their team a chance to do what they do best, because man alive is their talent behind that scrum. Caleb Muntz had a really solid season for the Fijian drawer and has looked to the manner born in a Fiji shirt so far, and his halfback partner, Frank Lamani, is a vastly underrated catalyst of a 9. Captain Waisea Naisalevu is bringing a beautifully specific, unique Fijian blend of being calm, collected, and yet utterly batshit box office to a third World Cup now, and he's a fantastic player to keep an eye on. Joshua Tuisova looks to be a 12 now. That noise you just heard is Josh Adams sighing the deepest sigh of relief, and every inside centre in the tournament simultaneously going, ah, shit. And boy, he's been causing some chaos in the PNC alongside younger winger Celestino Ravatamada. Maybe the world's biggest Semi Ranjanda fanboy is actually another winger whose name is still being whispered amongst curse words in Wales, who he reminds me most of. For Ravatamada might as well be the second coming of Vilimoni Delisau, a player who tore Wales apart in 2007. Ravatamada is incredibly quick, incredibly hard-working, and deceptively deceptive. He can beat a man so easily. Expect this young kid with just a few caps to really make a name for himself and a fool of at least one big name this September. Because this is a fascinating Fiji team that's currently headed for France. The last few years' ups and downs have really made them something of an unknown quantity, but the quality never changes. The sheer ability to beat Wales and Australia is definitely within them, but I wonder whether the draw might be a little bit too tough. Facing Cymru last in 2007 was perfect, allowing them to eat off the panic Wales felt after already losing to Australia and almost slipping up against Canada. This Wales team are eminently beatable, and the Fiji team are absolutely good enough, especially with their improving pack. The question is instead of tactics, but not for Fiji, because I trust they will play the game that suits them best, but of Wales. With Warren Gatland at the helm and no last match we could go home jitters, but rather first game we want to make a statement motivation, expect Cymru to curate an unwatchable tactic of kickfest, zero running, horrible rugby, ruining a great opening weekend the World Cup, but desperately avoiding the opening match mistake made in 2007. However, if Wales do get sucked into playing off instinct rather than the boot, there's every chance we could be headed for a full circle moment for Warren Gatland, who leaves Wales, as it turns out, exactly where he picked them up. Fiji then play Australia second, thankfully with a 7-day turnaround, meaning they'll know whether they're getting out the group by the end of week 2. It's a really cruel draw. The last 2 games, either banana skins or chances to save face after losing their 2 most important fixtures. Because whilst in 2019 and 2020, Fiji were resounding winners against Georgia, the last time they played, the Lelos struck back and secured a draw. Meaning this game is perhaps one of the most mouth-watering of the entire tournament. This has become a real grudge match. The Southern Hemisphere's best Tier 2 team against the Northern Hemisphere's best Tier 2 team. Regardless of whether they win or lose those opening 2 games, the Georgia match represents a bonus knockout game, as Fiji look to at least secure automatic qualification for 2027. It's a game the Fijians probably enter as favourites, but with enough peril to make it really, really interesting, because it's impossible to write Georgia out here. The draw is rough. It's hard, yet the talent goes so much harder. The ability of this team is not in question, and the traditional weaknesses are filling out quickly and building into something resembling strengths. Because if you're Iwalui, Naisalevu, or anyone in the Fiji camp, this isn't a hard draw. This is an exciting and possible challenge. Eddie's Australia are still an unknown quantity. Wales are quantifiably shit, and the other 2 teams are ones they've consistently beaten over their entire history of playing them. Because much as we can apply logic to the process, it's always much more fun to apply magic. And very little applies magic to a rugby match better than giving it to the Fijian lad. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. That is part 13 in an ongoing series on all 20 teams in the Rugby World Cup. There are obviously 7 more to come, which will come over the next couple of weeks leading into the World Cup. It's getting very, very close now. Tonga will be up next Monday. Hopefully, Australia, depending on how we are, later this week. New Zealand coming shortly after that. Trying to get through all of them. Won't be covering any of the World Cup warm-ups, I'm afraid, or any of the kind of, floating games remaining before here and now. Because, it's a lot to get through. These are taking an awful lot of work. All of them. It's been a constant rolling effort since before the Six Nations. I started working on most of these. And it's just been a constant nightmare. So I'll see you very soon for more rugby.
The big policemen, a lot of the Fijians are policemen or soldiers, and Severo Koran Duandua.